as people trickle in, I can at least start introducing the program and our panelists. My name is Jen Pratt. I manage creative projects for the Pequot Library, and that means that I get to help plan some of the programming as well. And I'm so happy to welcome Alicia and Caroline from CIRI, the Connecticut Institute for Refugees and Immigrants, here in Connecticut. And they are here to talk to us about unaccompanied children in Connecticut, of which Alicia was just telling me there are hundreds. So I'm really excited to hear what they have to tell us. They have put together a presentation, and I feel like we have a lot to learn. Alicia is a senior staff attorney. Alicia, if you want to just wave, so we can see who you are. Alicia is a senior staff attorney with CIRI, working in anti-human trafficking. She's been with the organization for 10 years. So she started as a volunteer. And Caroline is the director of immigration legal services up in Hartford. And she's been with the organization for 7 years. So tons of experience between the two of them. This program is presented in conjunction with our current exhibition, Crossing the Border, The Challenging Truths of Human Migration, which is on view in the Perkin Gallery right now. Unfortunately, we are temporarily closed for browsing, but we hope that you will visit it when we reopen. And and let's just get the program started. I'm looking so forward to hearing what you all have to say. There will be a Q&A at the end. There's a Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen if attendees and participants would like to use that to ask questions. You can also just drop a question in the chat, and we'll try to get to everybody's questions and comments at the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Alicia and Caroline.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jen. I am going to share my screen so that we can put up a PowerPoint here that will sort of can guide us as we discuss a little bit about unaccompanied alien children and the particular vulnerability of this population, at least in terms of what we see here in Connecticut. As you can see, Caroline and I have put together information that we think is the most helpful in the relatively short amount of time we have together this afternoon. But certainly we'd like for this information to actually be the most helpful and relevant that it can be to those of you who are joining us today. So please do feel free to type your questions into the chat box or into the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to make sure that we catch those and are happy to modify and go off the presentation and discuss whatever makes the most sense for everyone. So that being said, I can't see the chat. I don't think I can see the chat box when I'm sharing my screen. So Caroline or Jen, you might have
I have it up. I have it up. I'll keep track of it.
Perfect. Okay, so again, both Caroline and I are from CIRI, the Connecticut Institute for Refugees and Immigrants, which, if you aren't familiar with us already, we are a statewide nonprofit organization that's been working with immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and other vulnerable populations here in the state of Connecticut since 1918. So over 100 years of services, all aimed at ensuring that these newcomers to our country can become self-sufficient. Yes, love. Yeah, in a minute. And integrated. Babe, I can't right now. Hold on 1 second, please. And integrated members of our community. Sorry about the, we occasionally may have intruders because there's several small ones living here. So that's CIRI. If you're not familiar with the great work that we do or ways to get involved and volunteer, do check out our website. There's lots of great information there, and that's CIRICT.org. So yeah, when we are talking about unaccompanied alien children, and I'm going to, and Caroline will in just a short amount of time, talk about what precisely that means, the legal category of an unaccompanied alien minor or unaccompanied alien child. But I think that the starting point for this conversation is the vulnerability of this population and how important it is to recognize that for the general public and also for those who may be engaging with this population through school systems or other systems of care in our communities. And so this is a group of individuals that are vulnerable for some just general ways, right? We're talking about children. We're talking about children who more often than not are living in poverty or at least below, please be quiet, medium income levels. And we're also talking about vulnerable children who are working within legal and social frameworks that may be outdated or may not have been updated to meet the current needs and priorities of today's society. And then when that couples with the vulnerability of being foreign-born, we see this really particular and intense vulnerability of these foreign-born unaccompanied children, right? So those individuals who are foreign-born, who are relatively newcomers to the United States, are inherently vulnerable for some of the reasons that I have here, right? They may not have permanent legal status here in the United States. Many of the individuals that we work with, CIRI, may have lower levels of education because they had to leave school systems to work, to support their families, or because they had to flee their homes, flee persecution and other atrocities. We're also often talking about individuals who have less of an ability to speak and understand English. When we're talking about the populations that we serve in our Unaccompanied Alien Children program, that may also mean children who don't have high fluency in Spanish either, because they're coming from a country or an area of a country where what they spoke at home was one of the many, many indigenous languages. And so even trying to get by with an interpreter who speaks Castilian Spanish is not going to be particularly helpful as they move forward. Caroline, do you want to talk a little bit about the legal definition of unaccompanied alien children and who we're talking about when we talk about them?
Yes. So when we talk about unaccompanied alien children, we're actually talking about a legal definition from the U.S. government. And that's a person who is under 18, their child, and they don't have any lawful immigration status in the United States. And at the point that immigration encounters them, it's determined that they don't have a parent or a legal guardian with them to provide protection to them. The majority that we see are from what we call the Northern Triangle countries, which would be Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. But in terms of unaccompanied alien children who are in the immigration system, it spans the globe. So the way that a UAC or an unaccompanied child is usually, we find that the government encounters them at the border. And either the Department of Homeland Security or Border Patrol is determining that their legal status and their age. And once it is determined that that person is a minor and that they're not accompanied by a parent or legal guardian, they're required to transfer jurisdiction. That process is not 100% error-proof because, as it says here, traffickers sometimes pose as parents. Determining whether the child is actually related to the adult accompanying them is not a perfect process. So these children are not supposed to stay in CBP or basically, which is a law enforcement agency custody for an extended period of time. Instead, they're transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services. They're given a medical checkup and they are placed in a temporary shelter, which provides them with services, education, and housing while they attempt to reunify them with parents. And there are shelters like this in the state of Connecticut as well as across the country. These are meant as a temporary measure to ensure that the child's not being held in a detention facility. They're held in a child-friendly facility, and they're provided with opportunities to have their education addressed. And while they're there, they're also provided with legal assistance, so usually by partner agencies. And for that entire time, they're still in removal proceedings. And so Health and Human Services is charged with creating a family plan or agreement with a family member in the United States. The family member does not have to have legal immigration status. They are looking for someone who is close to the minor, but that's not always possible as a placement. So we do see minors who are placed with distant family members, sometimes family members they haven't met, or who are placed with family friends. The family member has to agree to care for the minor and has to agree to take them to their immigration court hearings. Once this placement is agreed to, Health and Human Services, the government agency, helps to move the court case to the place where the minor is going to be residing. So if the minor is detained in Texas, they have to make arrangements for the minor's case and the minor to be moved to Connecticut if that's where the sponsor is living. There are some cases where the minor cannot be reunited, and in that case, they're going to be held in juvenile facilities, and there's an attempt made to find a foster family. And during that time, Health and Human Services continues to monitor and assist the unaccompanied minor. And through all this, regardless of how the placement works out, the child is still in removal proceedings, process to deport the child from the United States.
And I think that point really bears repeating, because I think there's a conception a misconception that exists among a lot of people that makes sense, right? That rationally thinking that if we're talking about a vulnerable child, a vulnerable infant in some cases, how are we deporting them? How are they not able to find some way to legally protect themselves, to obtain a status or authorization to remain here in the U.S.? And I know Caroline and I, in many cases, wish that was so, that there was a form of immigration relief available purely for being an unaccompanied child, a child who by legal definition is without someone who can provide appropriate care for them. But that's not the case, right? These are children who are apprehended, who are detained by ICE, by immigration enforcement, and whom they are trying to deport. But during that deportation process, they are able to be living here, potentially with a family member or whomever the sponsor is, while they attempt to navigate this process. And it's a really difficult process. Children, unaccompanied alien children, are expected to attend all of their immigration court proceedings. They're expected to locate, hire, and pay for their own attorney, even if we're talking about an infant, right? Immigration is civil. So this isn't a criminal process where the state can assign an attorney, a government-funded attorney for indigent individuals. In this civil immigration system, you have the right to an attorney, but at your own expense. And so 6-month-old baby, right? And we've worked with unaccompanied alien children as young as months old, is expected to go to your hearing and pay for, and collaborate with an attorney to represent your interests and hopefully fight a deportation. And if you aren't able to find and pay for an attorney, then you're expected to proceed on your own, which is most likely going to result in a quick order of removal. Right? There isn't an assigned attorney. There aren't benefits that are provided. These are individuals who are undocumented, so not eligible for federal means tested public benefits. There's no cash assistance or any assistance provided to the child himself or herself, nor to the sponsor who is taking over care. And so that results in a lot of additional challenges and obstacles for the minor. Right. So, for example, a child who is a newcomer to Connecticut, right, who is has most likely suffered trauma in their home country or en route to the US, right? Trauma that was the driving factor that led them to flee to the United States or to seek the care of someone here in the US. Many of the individuals we work with, including children, have suffered from serious victimization or witnessed serious victimization en route to the US on the really perilous journey up across the southern border and may have experienced additional trauma as a result. And so, a traumatized, vulnerable child in a traumatizing process being deported from the US without the ability to speak English, expected to enroll in school, just that alone can be really challenging, especially when the adult who is taking care of him or her may not fully understand how to do that or speak English or have had an educational experience themselves to best equip them to advocate for this child. And there's no additional support provided for that. And so it's really this perfect storm for there to be crisis. And what that crisis looks like varies from case to case, but there really is always something, right? Even in the best case scenario, when we are able, and there are minors who are placed with loving adult caregivers, say the parent that whom they haven't seen in 10 years because parent fled when child was really young to try to make money to put food on the table and left child with grandma or aunt or someone, a different family member. And now, as is the case, as we've seen in many cases, grandma or family member has died or been killed, or is otherwise unable to provide ongoing care. So the child flees to the US and is reunified with mom or dad, right? Best case scenario in many cases. Even in that best case scenario where mom or dad has the best interests in mind for the child and it's the best fit for the child, we're talking about these circumstances where the child has suffered trauma, is going through this traumatic process, is trying to enroll in school, trying to acclimate to a completely new world that may be temporary because they are potentially being deported, living with an adult whom they may not know, whom they may not have seen for a decade or in some cases longer, and whom they have never been parented by. And a parent who is trying to parent an adolescent or a preteen or a child whom they haven't seen in person or parented, right? Even when it's the best case scenario, it's ripe for some sort of conflict. And there's then also the other scenarios where minors are not placed with adults who have their best interests in mind and will disappear, not enroll in school, and become even more vulnerable to various types of exploitation, up to and including human trafficking. One of the reasons why we started at CIRI doing a lot of these discussions about unaccompanied alien children, as well as their vulnerability and their particular vulnerability to human trafficking, is because we've seen it, right? We saw how the children we were serving in our unaccompanied alien child program were so often being referred over to our anti-human trafficking program, right? That the children we were seeing had been victims of forced labor or commercial sex trafficking, or a combination of the two, either in their home country and or en route to the US as part of the ordeal that brought them here, or once they arrived and after placement with a caregiver or an ORR sponsor here in the United States. And then in some also more unfortunate cases, in some minors who were not able to successfully navigate removal proceedings here in the US, were deported and then subject to human trafficking and other victimization in their home country. At the outset, Jen mentioned that there are hundreds of unaccompanied alien children here in Connecticut. We don't have a solid number of a solid way to know the total number of unaccompanied alien children currently here in Connecticut, but we have some some guideposts, right? So the Office of Refugee Resettlement will publish every fiscal year the number of minors that were reunified with family members or sponsors here in Connecticut over the past 2 fiscal years. That's totaled at about 1,200 minors, 1,200. But that's not going to be that may not accurately reflect the current population, because there may have been out migration and in migration from neighboring states or into neighboring states, and some minors are deported as well. But the numbers, but we have a good deal of these children in our communities, in our schools, and navigating the immigration court here in the state of Connecticut. We're not going to play this clip today, but I wanted to keep the link in here as a reminder and also as a reference point. There's a really great, in my opinion, documentary that was done by Frontline for PBS. It is called Trafficked in America, and it's available online at pbs.org, for free. You can watch it in its entirety online for free. And it is a really interesting and also heartbreaking story of several unaccompanied alien children, young boys, young men who were exploited in labor trafficking at a chicken farm in Marion, Ohio. And the story itself is really compelling and heartbreaking, but also there's some good information that talks about, why minors might come to the U.S., the journey that it takes to get here, the legal processes that they have to navigate, and all of the different vulnerability points throughout. So it's just something that I recommend for anybody who's interested. Caroline, you want to talk briefly about where there may actually be some kinds of immigration relief for unaccompanied alien children?
Yes. So as we emphasized, as children are here, as they go through a placement process, as they're released from custody and hopefully reunited with a family member, they continue to be in removal proceedings. So they have to attend court dates, and they have to show to the immigration judge that they have a legal cause or legal reason to remain in the United States. So here we have some of the forms of relief that are specific to survivors. So there may be some other things that people can apply for, like asylum. But for children who have been victims of trauma, these are the main forms of relief. So we have relief under the Violence Against Women Act. We have a special immigrant juvenile status, and U visas and T visas. Does the next slide summarize it, or should I go through it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will go through. So the Violence Against Women Act is not just for women. It's a very broad piece of legislation that allows for basically relatives of U.S. citizens or permanent residents who are abused or mistreated or subjected to extreme cruelty by that permanent resident or U.S. citizen who would otherwise be able to petition for them to get immigration status. It allows them to file a self-petition. So in the case of an unaccompanied minor who may come into the United States and have a parent who has status, but isn't willing to use that status to help them, and is instead exploiting them, abusing them, or subjecting them to forms of extreme cruelty, that child has the opportunity to take that information, that the child has this permanent resident or U.S. citizen relative, that the child has been subject to this treatment. They also have to show that they're a person of good moral character, and they're able to take that and they're able to apply for the VAWA self-petition and eventually for a permanent resident status. And in that case, this is limited because you are looking for a parent who is a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen. For some of our minors, it could also be a spouse, although we see that less commonly with juvenile population. So it's a similar pattern. A husband or wife is abusive. That husband or wife has permanent resident or U.S. citizen status, and the minor has good moral character. They can apply for relief, and they can apply eventually for permanent resident status. The second type of relief is the closest that we get to a relief that's intended to address unaccompanied minors, vulnerable children, because this is for a minor who has been abandoned, neglected, or abused by one or both parents. And this vulnerable minor is able to ask the probate court in the state of Connecticut to recognize that this is the case and to make usually through a guardianship appointment or through a custody determination. Usually what this happens is the abusive parent is terminated, their parental rights are terminated. And with that decision, the judge is able to issue a decision saying that the child, they've made these special findings, and because of those special findings, it's not in the child's, or for other reasons, it's not in the child's best interest to return to country of origin. Juvenile then takes the probate court decision and takes it to immigration, wherein they can file for special immigrant juvenile status and permanent residence in the United States. For children in those Northern Triangle countries, which I mentioned, these cases are backlogged because there are so many children who meet those criteria who are making these applications. And this does not work for all children because some of the children do have parents who care about them, love them, and are not abusive, did not abandon them, and did not neglect them. And so that may not be an option. So the two other things are very specifically for people who have been victims of crimes. A U visa is for a person who is a victim of a crime, and American law enforcement is going to have to certify that they were a victim of a crime and also that they were helpful in the investigation. Right now, there's a cap on U visas. So U visa is intended to allow the person to remain here while an investigation continues, and then to apply for permanent residence after 3 years. Currently with U visas, we're seeing significant wait time. So people who are applying for U visa today may not expect to see their U visa until a decade later. That means that it may or may not be a good form of immigration relief for the minor, because immigration judges understand that a U visa can be received outside of the United States. So you may have a child who's going to receive a U visa many years from now, and the immigration judge makes a determination that the child can be deported now because it's going to be years until they get their U visa, and they can apply for it at the consulate. So that form of relief may not actually help our children or our unaccompanied minors from being removed. The last form is specific to children who are victims of trafficking or attempted trafficking. So it's called a T visa, because our visas are basically an alphabet, but the T visa is specific to trafficking. For that, we are looking at all sorts of different situations, from the time that the child tried to enter the United States through current times where the child is placed with a sponsor, to see if there's any sort of commercial sexual exploitation or any sort of forced labor or labor that was the result of fraud or coercion. And if a child is a victim of that, we can apply for a T visa. Like the U visa, once the T visa is granted, it allows 3 years of residence here and eventually an application for permanent residence. There is also a type of relief that a child can receive from law enforcement if law enforcement is willing to grant them. It's called continued presence. It basically is a form of temporary relief that you can only get from law enforcement. So if you have a minor who is not able, say, like a very young child or a very traumatized child, who's not able to cooperate with law enforcement, that could be an obstacle. Also, law enforcement's willingness to grant that type of benefit. So I realize it's complicated, but that's my brief overview.
Thanks, Caroline. So I think that, one of the common scenarios that we see, right, when it comes to these vulnerable children then being targeted for certain types of exploitation is where the minor is placed in the home of a sponsor. And in these cases, it often is not the parent, but in some cases is another family member, a cousin or an aunt. 1 second. Great, thank you. Just needed an update about how the playing is going. And so they're placed with a sponsor. Who then, it says to the child, okay, so you are living in our home and I have to bring you to court, bring you to your ICE check-ins every month, provide you with food, help get you to school, and all of that costs money. And so now you're going to need to do this work, right? You're going to need to babysit these other kids in the house, or do this other work in the house, or go work at this restaurant, so that you can generate some income to offset these costs. And, you aren't going to be able to work enough if you're going to school, and we've had, troubles enrolling you in school anyways, as we've seen with some children who are unable to get into high school because they are older but haven't graduated high school yet and don't have enough English proficiency and for other reasons. And so again, sponsor says, so, you unfortunately cannot go to school because you're going to have to work, right? And I know that I've seen that scenario time and time again. And the minor is in this really vulnerable position where they are being exploited for work. And it kind of ranges in severity, but, can often escalate from there. And because it's a child who doesn't speak English, who may not understand their rights and how laws work here in the US, is very often terrified of law enforcement, right? Maybe coming from a country where law enforcement is corrupt, aren't the ones you call when you need help. And otherwise not in the best position to ask for help, get help, access resources to actually be able to go to school and avoid those types of circumstances. There are resources available to these children, but they are not as plentiful as they perhaps should be. Okay, you can in a minute. CIRI does offer specific services in both our social and legal services side, but even those can be limited and often are limited by government contracts. So, for example, in our social services side, in our Unaccompanied Alien Child program, we provide both home study and post-release services. What that means is that there's 2 ways that we can engage with minors and their potential sponsors. One way is while they're still detained, helping to ensure that the home and sponsor that has been identified by Health and Human Services is going to be a good fit, that there's been background checks run on the adults in the home, that there's a bed for the child to sleep in, food in the refrigerator, that it's otherwise going to be a safe and appropriate place for the child. And then the second is for post-release services, which means, going to the child, going to visit the home after release to ensure that the child is enrolling in school, that is still in this safe environment, knows about their court date, knows about what they have to do to move forward, has secured, or we're working with them to try to place them with an attorney. But even that isn't going to catch everyone, right? The minors that we serve through that program are basically assigned to us as a subcontractor of the government, and children may be placed through other programs or have migrated to Connecticut as a second stop after a first landing with their sponsor, and so may not be aware of those services or be in a position to access them. And so, for all of those reasons, really, really vulnerable. So I think that we are open to anybody's questions about, what we've discussed so far, or anything else related to unaccompanied alien children or trafficking or immigration. I don't know, Caroline, if there was anything else that you also wanted to add.
It doesn't look like we have any questions or comments in the chat box yet that I can see. I just wanted to emphasize that what we do see in terms of what you were saying, what we do see in terms of children, in addition to all of these obstacles and not having access to resources, oftentimes when we encounter children who might be eligible for relief based on exploitation, based on trauma suffered, there are other issues, which would be trust, basically being willing to disclose this information, or even realizing that they have been victimized, because it may be that in their family or in the environment where they came from, certain forms of physical discipline, which would be considered abuse in the United States, are accepted. Work from a young age is often accepted, especially in an agricultural environment. So children that we speak to are often forced to leave school around the age of 10, and sometimes even younger, in order to work and provide and help provide for their family. So that expectation when they come in at the age of 16 or 17 that they work may not seem out of place to them. And then when they're working 12-hour shifts or can't attend school because they're working 7 days a week, they may not see this as something that they need to report, that they need to tell someone about. And that assumes that there's, even if they want to tell someone, that assumes there's not a sense of family loyalty or concern that the person they're reporting or talking about or the behavior that they're discussing, there's a fear that that would get their mom, their dad in trouble, or their relative, or that it would mean that the parent loses custody of younger siblings. So there are a variety of concerns and obstacles that children see or experience beyond what we've talked about. So we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here.
At what point, you mentioned that you're a government subcontractor. So are all of the children that you guys work with coming through that avenue? Or do you work with?
No. So we're actually, to be precise, we're a government subcontractor's subcontractor, right? So, we work as providing the direct service for, the primary subcontractor for the government, right? HHS subcontracts many different organizations to provide legal services for detained minors, as well as social services for minors who are to be released with these ORR sponsors. And so some of the minors that we work with are through one of those subcontracted programs, but then many of the minors that we work with are come to us through our legal services program. And so that's completely outside of the realm of any of our government contracts, right? So these are children who need an attorney because they're in removal proceedings, and we are on the list of providers of affordable and in some cases free legal assistance in immigration matters that is provided by the courthouse to pro se respondents. So they find us that way through legal services.
So essentially, you guys need to be sought out, or not need to, but you're most typically sought out by children or families of children who are already going through this legal process.
Yes. So we see certain numbers. We receive, we work with other organizations to get referrals. We have the ones that were notified about by the government. But a lot of times it's, especially pre-pandemic, we don't see people walking into our offices as much anymore. But a lot of times it's, a 16-year-old showing up with an orange envelope saying, I think I need to see an attorney, and the judge told me to come here down the street.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they don't know that they're in deportation proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
So we're scheduling appointments for them. We're seeing them. And that is historically been how we see or run into most of our juveniles that we're assisting.
Sure. I guess I'm tap dancing around a question about how those younger kids who don't have reliable sponsors advocating for them, do they essentially, who don't know that they need advocacy? What is the best way? And then I see we have a couple questions, which is great. But I'm just wondering, how those kids find advocacy. Is there...
They may fall through the cracks, right? I mean, that's why I think conversations like this are so important, because we are only going to see a certain number of these children, those who either were assigned to us or that they've come in looking for legal services. These children they may not come through our doors, but they might be, in your school or, in your after school program, or coming to your, into your library or your museum program. And so, that is sort of the goal, right? Is trying to ensure that folks are aware of this population and their vulnerability, and can potentially help connect them to resources like CIRI and other organizations, so that they can access the help and advocacy that they need.
So really awareness is kind of just community awareness.
Right.
Jacqueline is asking, what do you as CIRI attorneys actually do? What is a typical day for you?
So I'll answer, and then I'll let you, Caroline, say what your day looks like. A pre-COVID day, it looked a little bit different than in the midst of a pandemic day. I usually have less children around me, but during the workday. But most of my day is usually spent working with clients. So on the phone with clients, helping them craft their declarations, helping them get together the evidence that they need to try to make whatever type of immigration relief, immigration case they are trying to make. So, working on their cases, doing research and writing and filling out documents, and then reviewing them with clients. I mean, it's typical legal work, but only immigration. But because we're a nonprofit, and so we all wear many, many hats, I also spend many hours a week talking to the general public about issues related to immigration law, human trafficking, foreign-born children, and lots of related topics, also to educators and law enforcement and medical professionals and other individuals, so that we can collectively be more aware of many of these issues and hopefully address some of the inequities and ensure that these members of our communities are connected to the resources that are available. Caroline, what's
so my typical day is, like Alicia said, it's a lot of talking with clients, meeting with clients, working on cases. We also have for clients who are in removal proceedings. The day usually starts at 7:30 outside of the courthouse, and going through and waiting for your turn in court. Now we're doing that telephonically. For individuals have interviews with immigration, we might be preparing their case. We might be discussing what to expect when they do have a hearing. The other part is our community facing, which Alicia does a lot of outreach. We also provide technical support to other organizations, other attorneys who are trying to do this work. people who are trying to provide support. So one of the reasons that outreach is so important is because I get emails from teachers, guidance counselors, librarians, parents who have a friend of their child who want assistance for that child, and they're stepping up in a place where there might not otherwise be somebody who has the agency to provide that support to the child. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is connecting people to services, seeing if it's something that we can help with, referring to the many other organizations that are here in Connecticut that provide similar types of support. So it's never just one thing, one day. It depends. It's not always predictable.
Sometimes it's nice to mix it up. Susan asks, do you think the need for legal representation for unaccompanied minors will increase in 2021?
I think that there's always been an unmet need. Mm-hmm. There's always, I think that we're always struggling to try to help more unaccompanied minors who are not represented in front of court. And I think the number of unrepresented minors that we're going to see is going to climb significantly. For some of you may already be aware of this, there were stories earlier this year about children being held in hotels and also about children and other immigrants arriving at the border to seek asylum, who were being expelled from the United States based on reasons related to COVID-19 and rules related to that, which I could talk about that for a while. But basically over 100,000, I'm not sure about the final number, of people were expelled. So many of our service providers who normally see a lot of unaccompanied minors weren't getting them, or they were being held near the border. And now we're seeing larger numbers than we've seen before come to Connecticut just in the past week. So I think that trend is going to continue, and we're going to see many more unaccompanied minors than we did in this past year, where COVID and a lot of border restrictions, asylum restrictions really threw that off.
Mm-hmm. There's also just always been an unmet need in terms of legal representation for immigrants in general who are in removal proceedings, not just children, like children being among the particularly needy and vulnerable. But in general, there are, many individuals in removal proceedings, here in our immigration court in Hartford, who are being ordered removed daily. And mostly because they don't have an attorney, right? It is very difficult to win relief in our immigration court. Some of our judges have a denial rate that is over 90%. It's a scary place to practice, but that denial rate is going to be basically 100% for immigrants who don't have legal counsel. And there are many who don't because they can't afford private counsel, because they can't afford even lower cost, low bono counsel, because they are completely, especially now in the middle of a pandemic, completely unable to pay for any type of legal services. So there has consistently been a need in that realm that isn't going anywhere. The backlog in our immigration courts is really unbelievable at this point. And so even under a new administration, I don't expect a major change, at least not right away.
Yeah, and I think, this is my own ignorance, but I didn't realize that because it's a civil case and a civil trial, that you're not appointed an attorney, and it's almost as though they would be better off in a criminal trial, because at least then they would have some kind of representation. That was mind-boggling to me. So essentially, unless somebody has the awareness and the means to hire a lawyer, they're regardless of age, and then all of these additional vulnerabilities because they're children. That's
right. These are expensive cases, right? These are, if there's any lawyers attending who don't practice in immigration, maybe practice in, say, the family court, we're talking about cases that are going to span many, many years, right? 3 to 4 years at just the first court, right? The immigration court. And that's could be 100 hours of work. Right. And so, the private bar has to charge, right, a fee that covers 100 hours work in many cases. And so that's expensive, even at the lowest rung, right, in terms of what folks charge. And so nonprofits like us, right, do what we can to ensure that we provide an affordable rate. But that means we can only do a certain number of them, right? If we're providing 100 hours of legal work on, say, a defensive asylum case, one attorney can only take so many of those cases a year, and we can only hire so many attorneys and be able to pay them like a living wage. And so what we have to do is also rely upon pro bono attorneys, right? Leveraged partners who may be able to assist in some of these cases pro bono, or assist in parts of these cases pro bono. And so that is one way that we are continuing to hope to expand, to be able to match more immigrants who are without the monetary resources to pay for legal counsel with competent pro bono or really low bono counsel, so that they have the best shot possible at winning their case.
And do you partner with local law schools for help from those students who need to do pro bono work?
So we've historically worked really closely with the UConn School of Law and Quinnipiac School of Law, who both do, and Yale School of Law, don't want to forget them, who do a tremendous work in the immigration realm. But they're clinics, right? And they have students who are going to be in there for a semester, 2 semesters at best. Mm-hmm. So they do amazing work at a small scale, right? They can typically only take on 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 cases a year, and are going to, work the hell out of them. And they truly, I can't speak highly enough of the quality of work that comes from those law students and the transformative work that they do for their clients. But relative to the need, there's a lot more. And so that's why we also need to be able to leverage pro bono attorneys to help try to meet it.
It sounds like, especially if the cases take so long, then a law student's like a blip on the screen.
Right.
2 great questions related to how we can help. So one is, how can the general public help unaccompanied minors? I'd say outside of awareness, which we touched on. And the other is, what opportunities are there to support CIRI's work? I know that when I sent out the initial email about this program, people were asking if they could volunteer. And as a B-side to that question is, how do you sign up if you're interested in working as a pro bono attorney?
So those are great questions. There are many ways that we engage with volunteers at CIRI, through our social services, and in some ways through our legal services as well. The best way, I think, to see what our current opportunities are and to speak with someone at CIRI about ways that you can engage is to head to our website. There is a section there that says Get Involved, and you can sign up to be a volunteer right there. You can indicate, your particular interest if you're looking to provide support specifically for newly arrived refugees, or for survivors of torture, asylum seekers, or survivors of human trafficking, or unaccompanied alien children. And then one of our staff can ensure that they connect with you and make sure that we can find meaningful ways for you to support the work and support our clients. And certainly for those who are in a position to donate, we certainly always look for donations, both monetary donations to support the work and offset the costs of the services that we provide to our clients. But also there are times where other in-kind donations can be amazingly helpful and equally transformative. And so you will be able to see those and learn more about those on the website, which is, I mentioned at the beginning, is CIRICT.org. www.cirict.org, www.cirict.org. Jen, you typed.
Yeah, I stuck it in the chat if anyone wants to explore.
And if you are specifically interested in, if you're an attorney who's specifically interested in joining our pro bono attorney network, you can also connect with us through the website, or you can also email me or Caroline. Our contact information was on the slide deck, but I took it down. So I'll type our email addresses into the chat box as well, and you're welcome to connect with us. Our phone number and contact information is also on the website, but sometimes email can be the quickest when we're so often looking at our computers right now.
That's great. It looks like Caroline put it in there, so that's perfect. We have one more question before we break, and then I will let you guys get back to what I imagine you're very busy from what you've just described, and very important work. And the last question was from Judy Bunker, who says, does DCF have a role when relative sponsors abuse or neglect an unaccompanied minor? So kind of what happens there?
Yeah. Yes, they do. And it's a great question, Judy. Yes. So they have the same role, right? DCF is statutorily authorized, mandated to provide care, services, in some cases custody to abused, neglected, or otherwise uncared for children here in the state of Connecticut. So that would include foreign-born children, unaccompanied alien children. When there's an issue of abuse or neglect or something similar towards an unaccompanied alien child, DCF should be called as in any other circumstance, and DCF will provide the exact same services. So yes, and CIRI, we partner very closely with DCF. Unfortunately, right. We wish that DCF that it didn't call for so much involvement by DCF, but the reality is that very often we are collaborating on cases and referring cases back and forth. So yes, DCF does great work here in Connecticut. And has a lot of work with unaccompanied alien children.
Thank you so much for your time. That was important and enlightening, and I look forward to sharing this with the rest of our audience. For anyone who might have come in late, we're going to have a recording of this available on our YouTube channel. Any questions, of course, can be directed to the emails that were shared in the chat. If you missed those emails and you have a question in a week and you want to send us at Pequot a question, we're happy to forward any of that information along to our friends here. And I guess just everybody stay warm and safe in the impending storm. Thank you so much, Alicia and Caroline. That was wonderful, and we look forward to doing another program with CIRI in the future. So much to learn from you guys, and we will stay vigilant and aware.
Thank you so much for inviting us and letting us talk to your audience today. It's a pleasure, and hope to see the exhibit when things open up and get better.
Yeah, we hope to see you there too. Have a great weekend, and thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.